Hello, good people, and welcome to another edition of The Flow. I want to start out by mentioning Iran, because we often experience it as an abstraction, headlines, nuclear negotiations, protests, war. But, behind all of that are human beings trying to live, love, raise children, survive under enormous pressure. And today I want to move beyond the slogans and the talk and reach out into what it actually feels like to be inside of that reality. So today our guest is Zalal Habibi, an Iranian American human rights advocate and an amazing person. Thank you so much for Zalal for being with us today and giving us your time. She has spent more than 2 decades speaking on behalf of political prisoners, dissidents, and other ordinary Iranians who are just simply seeking freedom and dignity. Her own life was profoundly shaped by tragedy when her father, a respected Iranian writer and a political dissident, was killed during the 1988 massacre in Iran. I'm sure that was an experience, Zalal, that transformed the grief into a lifelong commitment to justice and human rights. She's also served on Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran and become an international voice on women's rights, political repression, authoritarianism, and the struggle for a democratic future in Iran. We are privileged and honored to have you on the show, Zalal. Welcome to The Flow.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you, and please allow me to greet those who are tuning in to the podcast today. As I mentioned, it's a pleasure to be with you and look forward to our discussion today.
So, Zalal, before we get into geopolitics and resistant movements and the right, I really want to begin with something that's more personal, if you don't mind. Your father was killed during the '88 massacre, and you were very young then. Can you take us back to that and help us to understand what was going on politically and what that experience was like for your family and for you, on a very human level?
Well, as you mentioned, 1988 massacre, I think, or the or what happened in the summer of 1988 is something that not only changed everything in my life and the perspective of that I had on life, but also for in our history, in the history of Iran, it is a turning point. That summer, right after the end of the Iran-Iraq war, which brought a 8-year war to an end, which has created so much destruction, and over 1 million people had been killed on both each side of the war, and so it was, there was a lot of devastation, and so Khomeini knew that society is, has had it up to here with this regime, and they were on the verge of, overthrowing this regime. And they felt that. Khomeini felt that his days are numbered, that it's a very critical situation, and he feared what will come next. And so what he did was he gave a fatwa, it's a religious decree, and it said, you know, have all of these political prisoners executed. It didn't matter if they already had their sentences. It didn't matter if their sentences had even ended. Some of them had finished their prison terms and they still weren't released and they were executed instead. But in the matter of 5-6 weeks, Khomeini had 30,000 political prisoners executed, just by asking them about 5 very simple questions. And the first was, do you still stand by your affiliation with the MEK? 90% of those who were executed were those who were affiliated with the MEK or PMOI, the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, and about 10% of them were people who were from other, like, less lenient or progressive movements, who were executed during that massacre. And with that, Khomeini was able to spread fear in society. So after the 8-year war, with those executions, they could spread fear in society. And we saw its results in the fact that the first time that there were major uprisings again in Iran was in 1999, so 11 years later. So it bought the regime 11 years' time,
Um,
especially at the
le
time that in 1989 Khomeini died himself and Khamenei came into power.
let me just go back to something you said because I think it was very, very powerful, and I don't want to let it just pass by. First, let's understand when you say political prisoners, were these people that had already been arrested and were in custody, or these people that were on the street and accused, or how would you describe those 30,000 people?
Well, most of them had been arrested probably in the early 80s, like 81, 82, 83. I guess like mostly between 81 and 84. For the most part, a lot of them, they were like their only charge that they had against them was like handing out pamphlets or selling a newspaper.
These were not people that were in custody necessarily. These were just people that had been identified as in opposition to the regime.
No, they were arrested for that, and they were in,
So
and they
they
were
all they were all in prison.
yeah, they were all
Okay,
in prison,
and
and they
then
already have sentences.
and
There were
but you say
some,
some of them had served their sentence and had been released,
no,
ju
they had served their sentence, they weren't released.
but
There
they were
were some who had served their sentences, they had been released. The regime went and rounded them up
run up.
again and brought them, and they were executed too. So that was also there was a percentage that were that people who had been released and they were rearrested
Arrested.
or
So
and they were executed then.
so their basic crime was simply being in opposition to the regime. It wasn't that they had committed theft or some assault or something we generally think of as a crime. It was just that they had expressed their lack of approval for the regime. Now, here's the point that I want to go back to. You said that they were asked 5 questions, and you mentioned one, and that question was, "Do you still stand by your organization, your position? Do you still stand by that?" And they said yes, they did, knowing full well that by saying that some terrible consequence was going to come on. And by the time the fifth or eighth or 10th one was asked, they already knew that it meant their life. And yet they still said yes. What kind of courage and bravery does that take, and where did it come from?
Actually, you touched on a very, very important point, I think. This is something that we take great pride in, like the Iranian people, and they are we actually have a term for it. We say, those who went to the gallows by standing their ground, you know, and this is something that we are seeing continuously. And these are people who they knew that the reason I said 5 questions was if you answered the first question as I still stand by it, that was it.
That was it.
You were added to that Congo line to go for execution. Um, and people knew that, but they still stayed steadfast. Um, and that is something that is exactly what the regime fears the most because, that kind of belief and defiance, that is something that's unbreakable. And we see the continuation of it today. Actually, yesterday I heard a audio file, from Bahid Bani Omarian. He was executed on April 4th of this year. Um, again, for affiliation with the MEK. He was 33 years old. And this was an audio message that he gave for his mother a few months ago. So I think in August or something like that. And where it was like his final farewell to his mother.
Mm.
It's a 10-minute, I think, audio file. And in it, he says, before me were those who went to the gallows with their heads up high in 1988, and I am the continuation of that. that
Hmm.
path. And so I'm not going to, you know, shy away from my dedication and from, the fact that we are not the ones who should be apologizing. This regime is the one who's supposed to be held accountable for the crimes that they're perpetrating. And it was so touching to hear it. I mean, like, I think I have listened to it at least 10 times in the past 2 days and just think to myself, like, he was not even born in 1988
Hmm.
and he is continuing their path. And the fact that you see this idea living on from generation to generation to generation, even in a generation that was born after the revolution, after the 1980s, born in the 1990s, but still has that same belief in the fact that this regime has to go and this is the path. And despite growing up in a system that, like, 24/7 they've been pumped with propaganda against this movement, against, any type of showing your dissent to this regime, but still this is the path they choose. He was actually one of the most he graduated at the top of his class. He was an engineer and he was like an elite student. And despite that, he this was the path that he chose, and he was steadfast till the last minute. And the thing is that he has now turned into like a source of inspiration
Hmm.
for Iranians around the world, not only in Iran, especially for their generation, for the Gen Z and Alpha generation right now. But and then
Wait,
when
tell
I
me
was
his name again.
Yes, Zahid Bani Amirian. There's actually English subtitles on this audio, and I will send it to you, and you could take a look at it.
I
But
would very much, I would very much like to receive that. Now, wait, before we go on, I really want to stay with this, um, and put it into, a continuing context for my American listeners. The organization, the affiliation, the party that you're speaking about, say the name of that party slowly.
yes, it's People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran. The abbreviation is PMOI or MEK.
And what does the M word stand for?
Mujahideen.
What is that?
Well, if I want to translate it literally, it would mean warriors, but it actually, like, historically in Iran, we had the 1906 revolution, which was which brought about it was a constitutional revolution, and those people who fought back then, they named themselves Mujahid, and so this was the founders of the PMI said we are the continuation of that struggle that wanted to create like a democracy in Iran at that time. So that's why they took that name. So
Okay, now
there's like
let
the literal
let me
translation, which is like Islamic, and then there's that historic translation,
the
which is
historic translation. So basically, we are the continuation of freedom fighters. Is the words that we would use. Now, is the manifesto of this party a violent one, or is it through peace and protest? Um, what is the stated methods of fighting for freedom of this party?
founders of the MEK have stated back 60 years ago, because it's 60 years of continuous fighting against both the Shah's regime and the current regime. They had the founder of the MK had a very interesting phrase. He said, "We never decide the method. It's always that the dictatorship or the enemy or decides the path that they leave for you to be able to pursue a democracy." The reality is that the MEK, like for instance, against the Shah, the founders of this movement, they were all student activists until the time that after the coup d'etat against Dr. Mossadegh, and then after the Shah forbid all forms of associations and organizations from having activities. He formed a one-party rule and said anyone who is opposed to this party or they either have to leave the country or they're going to be arrested. And after that, he forbid any form, assembly of any sort. And so they actually spent 6 years trying to put together their strategy and like their outlook on life because they were activists and all of a sudden there was no means of activity to be able to continue seeking, those liberties and freedoms and democracy. The reality is like after the revolution in 1979, the MEK tried everything possible because from the beginning they were opposed to Khomeini because they knew who Khomeini was. But they tried to use peaceful method possible to resist against this regime and to create reform within the system. They actually, over 50 members of our supporters and members of this movement were killed till June 20th, 1981. And on June 20th, 1981 was a turning point. And that was when a peaceful protest of 500,000 people in Tehran gave a statement, a order to open fire on the protesters. And it was broadcasted on the radio, giving the Revolutionary Guards open arms to, fire at will at anyone who was at the protest. And that day, thousands of people were killed in the streets. And from that night, the mass executions began in Iran. And since that day, the MEK felt like, well, we tried every single avenue till the last drop of freedom, and that was taken away. So we have no other means to change the situation other than taking up armed resistance against this regime. So at the end of the day, it's the regime that, provides that. So life never gives birth to a dove, unfortunately. And now we see that, like, for instance, in January with the protest, the people of Iran, it was a peaceful protest. The people of Iran who came to the streets, they were not armed, but they were met with lethal force. So, like, for instance, what people started doing was, and this is where the role of the resistance units, they started disarming the suppressive forces. They were protecting themselves with, using rocks or cocktail molotovs or whatever, but it was just to protect the people. And that is, what we are seeing. And that is actually why people are being executed today for doing that. And so that's our stance on that.
Okay. All right. Wow. So let me again, this is such powerful stuff. I don't want it to pass by. What I'm hearing you say is that starting back at the turn of the last century with the freedom fighters in the first revolution, there has been a theme of fighting for liberty and freedom that has run through Iran and has been oppressed by successive regimes. Every attempt has been made to protest peacefully. At times that becomes impossible because they choose to use lethal force, and it is important to protect oneself. Even so, the lethal force that they have at their hands is so much greater than that which the people have. It has resulted over the years in time after time virtual slaughters in the street of thousands and thousands of people. And yet, when asked, do you belong to this organization facing death, one after another will say, yes, I stand with them. That's an amazing story. So I want to ask you now to move forward to the beginning of the bombing that America let loose on Iran. We've had a conversation to chat a little bit, and during that conversation, you told me that Again, the oppression had become so severe and it has been so long lasting and so ritualistic and so never ending that the people were poised again to rise up against the regime. But then the bombs fell. So tell me about whether or not those bombs were helpful or in terms of rising up or not. And why do you think it came about that America made that decision, bringing into account the Israeli influence and the like? Can you put that together for us?
Yeah. As you mentioned, the reality is that the situation in Iran has become very unbearable for the people. In December, on December 28th, 2025, we saw the nationwide uprisings that broke out in Iran with the strike from the bazaar, which is like the backbone of Iran's economy. And it spread immediately to universities and throughout all 31 provinces of Iran. But everyone knew that within a few hours, the main slogan was concentrated on the entirety of this regime, that this regime has to go because there's no way we can, change anything with this system.
And give me a date time span. What dates and time are we speaking here?
This was the protest. I mean, the strike started on December 28th. December 29th, the students in different universities joined in, and by December 31st, it was like practically, I think, in half of Iran there were protests, and then by January 7th, it had spread to all 31 provinces, and on January 7th, there were two cities that were liberated by the people, so they were able to push back all of the suppressive forces, and so that was like the turning point. The next day, the regime um, actually shut down the internet and they started the mass killings. And thousands of people were killed at point blank on the street. They actually then went into hospitals and were firing coup de grace on people who were wounded in the hospitals. And during that blackout, I mean, the reality is that there are no clear numbers of how many people were killed. The numbers vary very much because there are those who do have, unfortunately, interest in the numbers that they're, speaking about. But our movement, National Council of Resistance of Iran, had been able to gather the names of over 2,600 people who were killed during those 2-3 days.
Of internet blackout.
Yeah, there was a 19-day internet blackout, so it was very difficult to be able to get the information out and verify it. And even after the internet blackout, there was like martial law in place in Iran, and it was very difficult to be able to navigate or be able to get those information because everyone was like, we saw hundreds of bodies around us, but you couldn't calculate all of that together.
Now,
Um,
you mentioned again in our previous conversation, you mentioned the police state that was imposed, and that there were checkpoints everywhere. Tell us about the phones and all that.
Yeah, I will tell you about because that's the checkpoint started with the war, but before that there was martial law instated,
Uh huh.
and then the families actually like the regime started broadcasting these videos of this area that they had gathered all the bodies. There was these black body bags, and they would tell the families to come and identify their loved ones who've been killed. And you could just imagine 50,000 people were also detained in the demonstration. So there are a lot of people who were just looking to see if their child is alive or has been killed or what happened to them because they never returned home during, those protests. And so, you could just imagine being a parent having to open these body bags one by one, like searching for your loved one. But every body that you're seeing is like a young, you know, teenager or in their early 20s that you're seeing, and it's very unbearable for the family. Um, After that, I mean, because of the martial law, it was very difficult for people to actually do anything or have any kind of movement. All university campuses had been shut down until like 40 days later, university classes resumed on, this is 1 week before the start of the war. So on February 22nd, university classes resumed on campus. That day, protests broke out in universities across Iran. And the next day, there was a operation carried out by 250 members of the MEK resistance unit who targeted the headquarters of Khomeini. The headquarters of Khomeini at that time was being, they had about 8,000, security personnel protecting it. But they were able to still infiltrate that layer of, protection and security. About 100 people were killed or arrested during that. But that sent a message to people in Iran because it was simultaneous. There were protests going on in the universities, and then there was this operation. So for people, it had a message that like this is going to be the new norm. This is how we have to push forward, because everyone knew that we can't allow the regime to push everyone back into their homes, because then we have to wait for the next spark. And then again, when we come to the streets of the protest, we will be met with brutal force, because this is the fourth major uprising we saw in Iran in the last decade. So this has been, repeated every time.
Wait, so let me stop there and kind of summarize what I'm hearing you say, just because it's worth repeating. What I'm hearing you say is that time after time, 4 times there have been uprising, 4 times the regime has been brutal in putting them down, to the point that they were able to push people back into the homes. Yet this time, on this occasion, not only was there the blackout and the closing down of the universities, but as soon as the universities opened up, the protests came back, and it was as if the spark had not been put out and the people had not been pushed back. And then there was a quasi-military operation to infiltrate the compound of the Ayatollah, and it was somewhat successful. At least successful enough so that the people heard about it and they said, "Wait, this regime is not that strong. We can make inroads. We may be able to do it, and so we can't be pushed back into our homes this time. It would just all start over again. We have to keep pushing forward." And this is on what day?
This is on, this is exactly 6 days before the start of the war. It was on the 23rd, February 23rd.
So what we're saying is the momentum had risen to an irresistible force 6 days before the bombs fell, ready for that final spark, ready to overthrow the Ayatollah. Now, please continue.
3 things happening simultaneously. So
3
there was,
things. Okay.
in Iran, they have when someone passes, they hold a ceremony, like memorial service for them 40 days after their death. That 40 days mark for those who had been killed in the protests were that week. So everywhere in Iran, even though the regime was not allowing gatherings or whatever, people were using those ceremonies as a form to gather. And instead of mourning their loved ones who had been lost, they started making pledges to continue this struggle and this fight for freedom, and to make sure that these lives were not lost in vain. And you could imagine how powerful that is in a society where, so many people have lost their young children and whatnot. So we had that. And then we had the protests in the universities, in different universities across Iran. And then we had the operation from the resistance unit. And everyone was seeing how these are coinciding together, and, how they go hand in hand with one another, really. And this is, at a time that the negotiations were happening, everyone was on heightened security. The regime was on heightened security because they feared that the war would start any day. And so during that kind of a heightened security, when you're able to infiltrate the most secure location of the regime, which had not been targeted in over 2 decades, that was what, sent that message to people. They're like, oh, the regime is in much weaker state than we actually think, because of that. So that was what happened then. And then you mentioned about, from February 28th that the war started, there has been another internet and communication blackout. And today is day 76 that we're recording this, day 76 of the blackout right now. Since then, the regime has set up checkpoints all over Iran. So like they say, if you want to travel like a 30-minute distance with your car, you will at least pass like 2 checkpoints along the way. In the checkpoints, they're not just checking your car or your ID. They are checking, like, they will check your phone to see when is the last time you've used certain apps, like for instance, Instagram or WhatsApp or things of that nature. And from that, based on that, they know that have you been able to circumvent the internet blackouts or not. If you have, you could be arrested. If you don't have your phone with you, they're like, oh, that's a red flag. They probably have something to hide, and that's why they don't have their phone with them. So they are really using these checkpoints as a way to just really control any kind of, communication between people, any kind of movements among people. And so, with the pretext of war, first of all, there's martial law. When there's, when the weather gets dark, everyone has to be in their homes or whatnot, except like the programs that the regime is setting up in public squares and cities. And then you're also not able to travel as easily. And there's no communication. Even in the first few days after the war, even phone lines weren't working, or like people couldn't send even text within the country. That was resolved a few days later, but even till now, you can't call, like someone here can't call someone in Iran, even using the phone line.
Just so we
They
understand, you are not in Iran. You're in France. Yeah, just so that in case anybody was wondering how you could be talking to us, you couldn't do this from Iran.
No. And right now, the phone lines are like this. Like for instance, you can't, from abroad, you can't call Iran. From inside of Iran, you can't call abroad with your mobile or cell phone. You have to use a landline, because landlines are completely controlled by the intelligence ministry. So, they can control, like, what are you talking about, what messages you're sending or whatnot. So that is the current circumstances. People are, going around the blackout by purchasing these like really, really expensive internet packages just to be able to send like a message outside to the world, like we are fine, or this is what's happening or whatnot. But that is very, very limited right now.
And so the bombs fell, and it in effect gave the regime an excuse to clamp down even harder. What was the effects of the attack by America on Iran? What was the effect on the people and the uprising?
Well, I think that on one hand, well, for instance, I don't think there was anyone in Iran who was not happy that Khomeini has been eliminated, but we also understand that this regime is not a classical dictatorship. The system is not going to collapse with just removing the top figure, because that whole apparatus is still intact. And that's why it differs from a scenario like Venezuela. But for the people of Iran, I mean, war is not, because I know there are some people who try to convey this like message that, oh, the people of Iran support the war. No, they don't. No, I don't think anyone supports their own people being bombed. And because with war comes the destruction of infrastructures. With it comes like civilians who are civilian casualties, which have been, in the thousands, but it's really also very hard to be able to navigate right now because of the blackout, and also the news that is coming out about the numbers is what the Iranian regime is allowing it to come out. So it's not verifiable really, but what is clear is that this war has had great, you know, destruction both in infrastructure and civilian lives. So that, you know, I think that just shows like what the situation is right now on the ground. And you have to imagine like people were protesting in January because they people were not able to make ends meet. Just imagine 1/3 of this year, the people of Iran, or maybe more now actually, have half of this past year, the people of Iran have been in an internet blackout. Most people in Iran are making their income off the internet because there are no jobs in Iran. So people really are having a very difficult time to even, be able to provide for their families. And just imagine like half of Tehran has been evacuated. The people really don't have anything. So I mean, the circumstances are very, very difficult from every angle and mm, that aspect that you look at it. So
So
it's a
wait, let
very
me
difficult
let me
situation.
let me phrase it this way. Do you think would it be fair to say that the people were on the brink of uprising and the bombs fell, and as a result of the destruction and also as a result of the regime's clamping down even more tightly, even though the people were ready to rise up, they have, unfortunately, it's been another situation where they have now forced back into waiting for the next time, waiting for the next
Because
spark.
when you have bombs over the head,
Hmm.
you're not able to do anything on the ground.
Correct, correct.
There's martial law in place. What are people are not able to, connect. They're not able to come to the streets or anything. So nothing can be done until like this war comes to an end, really. And that just buys time for the regime.
So do you think that the regime does not want the war to come to a negotiated end? Maybe we're going to end it, keep pushing it back, kind of keep that feeling like we're still on the edge of war. We still need to clamp down. We still need martial. So this is benefiting the regime in effect. The current situation of negotiation and continuance and ceasefire and no conclusion is in effect benefiting the regime. It helps them to keep the people down.
Yes, exactly. Because like for instance, even if you look to this day, the Iran-Iraq war is still a ceasefire. Still, they've never signed a peace treaty. The regime, yes, they want to drag their feet out as much as they can by time and that's why we're seeing this new wave of executions that has started with the
Oh,
ceasefire.
tell us what's going on with that. You've told me that there are literally executions every day, and these are broadcast, and the regime makes sure the people know this. Yeah, is
Since
that true?
since the ceasefire, every single day practically there has been one political prisoner executed. Some of them are protesters from the uprising, some from the January uprising. I think about three of them have been people who were arrested in the 2022 uprising. And then some, eight of them were actually members of the MEK who were executed. So it's like every
And
single,
how does the regime put that out?
yeah.
Do
So
they
what they're doing
publicize
right
that?
now,
Yep.
yeah, there's a website. It's called Mizan, and Mizan website. It belongs to the judiciary. Every single morning, or by about noon Iran time, they are putting out a statement that this morning this person was executed. And then in the evening news at 8:30, and the evening news of Iran, they broadcast like part of like forced confession by those people, or like they create like this video about them. This is why we had them executed, to spread fear in society. So that is what the regime has been doing. And the
Every
thing
day.
is that
Every day.
every single day. And the thing is that, I mean, if you wanted to have all of them executed, you could have had them all executed in one day, because that's what the regime usually does. The fact that they're doing it every single day because they want it to fit in, and then, I mean, the psychological war of it too. Like, for instance, every single day, most Iranians right now, like even in the diaspora right now, most of them wake up in the morning. The first thing that they're doing is like they're checking their phones to see who's been executed this morning, and they're waking up with that dread. Who's next. And some of the people who were, executed, some of them, they were arrested like the the date between their arrest and their execution is like less than 40 days. And, the regime was trying to send a message like, I see no mercy. Some of those who were executed, they were like 18, 19 years old. Two of them were sports champions. Three of them were like elite students from their university. We had even people who were in their like late 60s or in their 70s who were executed. The regime is trying to send a message. Look, I see no borders and I will not show mercy to anyone. And, this is what they're trying to push forward. And they also know that they have this green light right now because they know that during the negotiations, because of all the international community is so concentrated on the negotiations, they don't want anything to have an effect on the negotiations. So everyone has turned a blind eye on these executions. Normally, I mean, the Iranian regime, yes, they execute, unfortunately, at very high levels. Just in 2025, they had 2,200 people executed. But like, for instance, whenever they had a political execution, like political prisoners who were executed, there was, international reactions to it, like governments, the foreign ministries or State Department, they would give a statement of condemnation at least, like the minimum. This time, it's been 20 something people, 30 something people who have been executed, and complete silence. The UN has given statements, but none of the countries have given statements. Why? Because they don't want it to affect the negotiations, even though in reality, they should have this as one of the criteria for the negotiations, stopping the execution. But the regime knows right now they have this free hand.
Free hand.
Because, and then they're dragging their feet also in the negotiations. They know that they have this free hand. The same thing happened in 1988. This is like so much parallels. Like back then, everyone was like, look, ceasefire is very, it was just 1 week. The week the ceasefire was put in place, the executions began. So within 5-6 weeks, they had 30,000 people executed. But before anyone, at first, everyone thought, it was just like a few people who were being executed. Once they found out that, how extensive it was already too late. The prisons had been emptied. Right now, there's, a lot of the same parallels. And so that is something that's worrisome. One of the people who was executed actually in the beginning of April, he was one of the sole survivors of the 1988 massacre. He had been arrested as a teenager when he was 17. They didn't have enough charges against him to have him executed in the massacre. And so he was released like a year later after the massacre. And then he was rearrested like 2-3 times, and then he was executed. There's a video of him, like it's 6 seconds. That's the only thing that the regime was able to show because everything else was, he was in, so opposed to the regime. They asked him like, we gave you another chance. We let you go. And what did you do? And he's like, yes, I want to reconnect it to this resistance. And if you release me today, I will go and reconnect to this resistance again because, you are a dictatorship and you have to fall. And so that
Okay.
of, this person who has suffered so much from this regime, but still is so steadfast, that is really, it's inspirational for people inside Iran to see that.
I want to talk about 2 more things. I want to talk about, you mentioned that that your administrative organization of the regime. You mentioned it's not like your normal dictatorship. You can't just knock off the dictator and think the whole thing's going to fall. I think that that has something to do with the fact that you are a theocracy and that there's a religious fervor among the regime. But help us to understand how the regime is organized and why knocking off the top won't bring it down.
Well, as you mentioned, it's, I think, a bit of two things. On one hand, it is more complex than not, a normal dictatorship because it is a theocracy. So it has that, religious aspect of it that they try to lean on and be like, oh, this is legitimizing the regime to some extent for itself. The other thing is that this regime came to replace a monarchy. So it's not a hereditary, you know, hierarchy. It is a republic in form. So even though it has like a supreme leader, but it's still a republic. It has a president. It has a parliament. It has a judiciary or whatnot. So it says like I have all those branches. They have sham elections, even though everyone has to go through the filter of the supreme leader and the guardian council, but they still have these entities in place. So for instance, when Khomeini died, the Guardian Council chose Khomeini as the next supreme leader. Right now, that Khomeini has been eliminated, his son has been chosen by the Guardian Council. It doesn't fit too well for them. The fact that now they are also following like a hereditary type of system, and it seems, but that Guardian Council is there, even though today no one has actually seen Mojtaba Khamenei since the start of the war. They say he has been wounded, but it's not clear. There's no audio message of him or video message of him or anything. There have been written statements, but the fact is that the Guardian Council still exists, and so these entities are in place and they're intact. So that apparatus is still working, and also because this regime strives on war from that's like the two bases that this regime has always stood on two legs. One is suppression internally with executions, suppression and whatnot. The other was export of terrorism, fundamentalism, what they call revolution themselves, but warmongering. So they strive in situations of war. From the 12-day war in last summer, after that, they actually came up with a plan. They said, look, there is going to be a next time, and the next time they might be targeting some of the highest, ranks of the system. So what happens if that happens? So they had a plan in place that, look, everyone, they gave all the IRGC bases like a list of these are your targets if anything happens, like a doomsday, scenario, you target all these countries, you target these locations. And so they all did that independently because that was already planned out.
Already
So
planned.
yeah.
So let me ask you this: we are told that the Iranian regime supports, fosters, entices, helps, aids, and abets these organizations like Hezbollah and the civil war in Yemen and the like. How do the Iranian people think about that? And more importantly, how do they feel about that?
Well, that is one thing that in the slogans in Iran from 2009 till today, it's one of the slogans that people have against the regime is like um not Gaza, not Lebanon, my life for Iran. And they are opposed to Iran's proxy wars. And the fact that they understand that, look, the the resources of Iran are all being used for warmongering and for creating destruction around the world. And that is not something that the people of Iran ever supported. And,
And why do
the
you think
proxy.
the regime feels that this aids and helps them? Why do they? I mean, it seems like they've got enough trouble in their own country. Why it doesn't seem like diverting their resources away from their own country is going to be helpful. How do they look at it that they think that this is good for them?
Khomeini actually responded to this a few years ago, a decade ago, I guess. It was during the Arab Spring. And Khomeini said, if we don't fight on the streets of um, Damascus and, you know, and Beirut, Damascus, and Yemen, then we have to fight in the streets of Tehran, Mashhad, and Shiraz. And that is exactly what happened. If you look at the past 2 years, the Iranian regime has been on a decline from especially after the fall of Bashar Assad, because the Iranian regime relies on these conflicts in the region to create smoke screens to be able to legitimize itself. Because like one of the slogans that they had is like, okay, you don't have freedoms, but you have security. Look at all these other countries; they don't have that. So that's like one of their messages towards the people of Iran. On the other hand, because the Iranian regime knows that it doesn't have popular support among its own people, it depends on support from in these other countries. Like for instance, by supporting the Hezbollah, they're able to create like a popular base to be
Uh,
able to present themselves as the person who stands by the victims and the person who, the government that stands by people and whatnot, and tries to rally support that way. So they
so
can't rally around the
they
flag inside of Iran, so they try to rally around the flag outside of Iran.
as
That's
they're
like
the
what you
great
also see.
benefactors of that these are all the victims of Israeli oppression, and that they are the benefactors and the saviors coming in to help out these poor victims who have been oppressed by the Israelis and the like. Um,
So
okay,
like the same thing
now,
with Hafez in Iraq. Like for instance, they support them. They're like, oh, they're the ones who are standing in face of the US or whatnot. The regime has really relied on this as a part of their strategy for decades, especially because I mean, since the 80s, they know that they don't have that popular support in Iran, and so they also when you're at war, you have this excuse to be able to suppress everything internally to say, hush, we have a foreign enemy right now. So anyone who speaks against us right now is like a traitor,
right,
right?
right,
And so that is how Khomeini was able to control things, because you can imagine, like back in 1979, after the revolution, within 1 year, the war started. I mean, it was the hostage taking, and then the war started. People didn't really have time to even understand like what was happening in the country. And then Khomeini shut down the universities for 3 years because he knew that, look, young Iranians who created the revolution against the Shah, they're not ones to be giving in so easily to the mullahs. So they had to create these smoke screens and like all of these burning points to be able to, you know, divert attention from themselves and the crimes that they were perpetrating. So that has been their policy throughout all of these years to do that.
okay. So now let's talk about this triangle of the United States, Israel, and Iran. Um, I'm going to put forward, I'm just going to say this. It sure seems to me that the attack on Iran by the United States was an immense blunder. We see it as very ill thought out. Um, Everybody in the world told Trump that the plan was in to attack the neighboring countries, and he just didn't believe it would happen. I think because he was listening to Netanyahu, who was putting a bug in his ear about, no, 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 you just attack him and the people rise up. It'll be a 3-day thing. You'll be in and out in no time. And the like, and Israel was feeding him that information. And I think it was a lack of imagination, a lack of good intelligence. Um, but I think that Trump probably thought that he would drop the bombs and y'all would rise up, and that would be the end of it. It would be an easy in and easy out. Um, which was just bad intelligence. Do you think that Israel knew better and scammed President Trump, or do you think that they actually believed it themselves that if the United States attacked, there would be an uprising? And what is the relationship between Iran and Israel?
Well, I think that I can't put myself in their shoes. They have to respond to that themselves. But I think if you look at it logically or from a
Yeah.
military perspective, it was very clear that this is not the answer. Because as I said, Iran is not a classical dictatorship, so by removing the top figure, it's not going to fall or collapse. But also, if you look at it even from, geographically, I mean, Iran is like 3 times the size of Iraq, 4 times the population. I mean, the government is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism. And as you said, it is funding so many different proxy groups that it can utilize too in the region. Also, like, just look at the terrain of Iran. Like, for instance, like, which border do you plan on coming into Iran from? To reach Tehran, you have to go through, if you're coming from the north or from the west, you have to go through mountain ranges. If you come from the south or from the east, you have to go through the desert. If you go from, the north or the south, you have to go through the water and whatnot, and jungles or whatever. So I mean, it's not very likely. I mean, that was clear for anyone who has like the smallest understanding of
Geography.
geography or strategy or something. Um, so that said, there's also another thing that was played up, and unfortunately, we saw it a lot in the U.S. media too. And that was those who were trumping up the return of the monarchy and the son of the Shah. And the monarchists, because they lack any form of organizational structure or any kind of, they have not done anything for Iran in the last 47 years, and they just assume that the same way that Reza Pahlavi and then Muhammad Reza Pahlavi were instated by, the US or the Britain, they, Reza Pahlavi could also serve that, purpose for them. And so they were the ones who actually, unfortunately, were going into the media. Like Reza Pahlavi, there's so many videos of him saying that, please, the people of Iran want you to attack. And that is not realistic, but that was what served their benefit, because that was the only way that he could actually gain power in Iran, is if
Wait,
he
so you're
is
saying that the
Shah.
descendants of the Shah were putting forth the propaganda so that America would attack, so that they would be installed as the Shah was years ago. Well,
I,
that sounds pretty delusional, but
well,
but hey, as people listened.
It's just to be honest, like for a lot of us, I mean, there's one thing you read in history about like Goebbels and everything, and you're like, how did people not like? I remember in like reading in school like about World War II, and I'm like, how did people not understand this and whatnot? And now I'm seeing it in front of my eyes, and I'm like, my God, this is how propaganda wars are done, and this is how it is presented. And it's so, to me, it is, it really does bother me, like the, to see like the, I guess, the cost of it,
Hmm.
and, the, what it does to a nation, to its people, and the distrust that it creates, and also the division that it creates. That is why, like, even more than before, there's a slogan inside of Iran. It's been going around since like 2022, especially. They say, "Down with the oppressor, be it the Shah or the mullahs." There are a
Wait,
lot of
say that
people
again. Say it again.
down with the oppressor, be it the Shah or the mullahs. A lot of people were like, "Why are you targeting the Shah now? We're talking about the mullahs." But the people of Iran were drawing that line. They're like, "Look, any kind of oppressive rule, we oppose it because they want to move forward to a secular democratic republic in Iran. So they keep on drawing that line, like saying, look, we are not stuck between choosing between the current status quo or going back to the previous dictatorship. We want to move forward. It's the 21st century. We want to move forward to a, secular democratic republic in Iran. We want to have people's sovereignty for once. We want to have an independent, government that will serve the people of Iran instead of serving foreign interests. And that is something that we're seeing, and it's becoming louder and louder. That division is becoming louder. I mean, we see those, I guess, solidarity forming and those, coalitions coming together, who oppose these two forms of tyranny and dictatorship that we've experienced in the
Well,
past. And so that
Zalal, we're getting to the top of the hour, and I want to take a few moments to tell you that I really am honored to have you take the time to come onto this platform and give us this information, which many of us honestly are not privy to. And I certainly wish and hope that it makes a difference in some of our hearts. I'm sure that it will for anybody that listens to it. I want to thank you deeply and tell you that my heart is broken. I mean, we speak about these things as we go from topic to topic, and we talk about thousands of people executed, and you mentioned mothers being called to a pile of body bags and zipping them open to try to find their loved one, only to find some other teenager, some other mother's child there. The pain and the grief is so unimaginable. And I just want to validate that. And I want to give you the last word. So
well,
I want to ask you, yes, go ahead.
first of all, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to be able to echo the voice of the people of Iran because, as you said, we are hearing in the news a lot of the different narratives, but this narrative is missing. Like, what is, what is the message of the people of Iran? What are they going through right now? The price that has been paid for freedom in Iran has been very high. 120,000 of Iran's best, like the cream of the crop of Iran society, have been executed by this regime or been killed by this regime. But what's important is that we never given in and never given up. And as Mrs. Rajavi says, we can and we must bring about that change that we want to see. And hopefully that will be soon.
So
For those who wasn't,
what message can you give us in terms of being inspirational and also in terms of what can we do to help?
well, I think that there's a saying that they say that it's always darkest before dawn, and never to forget that. But I think there's a lot that we can do. We can all be agents of change, no matter where we are or, what our actual, occupation is, but we can all make a difference if we are not silent in face of these atrocities. So I would like to ask everyone, whoever, help in whatever way that you can. Number one is raising awareness and becoming more, educated on the subject. You can learn more by visiting ncr-iran.org or mayam-rajavi.com or mayam-rajavi-for-change.com. There's also, the Iranian diaspora is very vast. There's a lot of like different activities that they carry out in different cities and different states. In the U.S., there's the Organization of Iranian American Communities. It's their website is oiac.org. They have chapters in over 40 states, so you could probably be covered there. They actually have a rally on Saturday, May 16th, in Upper Senate Park, in DC, against this new wave of executions that thousands are gathering there that day. But at a larger scale, there's iranfreedom.org. If you're in other countries, you could reach out to them and they'll put you in contact with local chapters. Contact your lawmakers. ask them to, support and recognize the right of the Iranian people to overthrow this regime, but also to call for, a halt in these executions and to draw attention to the human rights situation right now in Iran and
You know
to
what
recognize
you just
people's
say,
rights.
what you just said is something that is done from time to time. That you reach out to some opposition leader and recognize them as the true government of Iran. Who would that be?
Well, right now there's actually a statement going around. Lawmakers around the world are supporting it to support the um, plan for the interim government after the overthrow of the regime, which has been presented by the National Council of Resistance of Iran and it's led by Maryam Rajavi. So that provisional government is actually something that the plan is completely written out. It's a 6-month period. And then it is followed by constitutional assembly elections, which will write the new constitution. And then there will be elections for that constitution. Based on the laws of that constitution, elections will be held. And that will be the end of, that interim system. But that is there. And there's actually a very extensive international campaign right now to voice support for that provisional government. And on June 20th, actually, June 20th this summer in Paris, there's going to be a gathering in support of this provisional government, recognizing this provisional government, but also against the wave of executions in Iran. It will be held in Paris on June 20th. So people are coming around. We're expecting about 100,000 people to be in attendance from the diaspora. And so it will also be broadcast live on social media, so people can tune in and show their support and solidarity. But this is a campaign that is continuing, and we will continue to try to echo the voice of the people of Iran as much as we can.
It certainly has my support, and I hope it'll have all of our support. Thank you, Zolal. Everything that she mentioned, all of the links that she mentioned, of course, will be in the show notes. Folks, thank you for tuning into this. I think this has been a very important, insightful, awakening podcast. Please look at the show notes. Find some place where you can chip in and lend a hand. Find a shovel. Find a pick. Do something. Do what you can. Thank you, Zolal. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with you.